Hello and welcome to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends. I'm your host, Leon Wolf, and we are glad that you've decided to join us. Today is Thursday, September the 3rd of 2015, and we're glad to be back after 1 week hiatus. We've got some new features that we're testing out for the first time on tonight's program. We're hopeful that we're going to have a chat function working, so this will make it a more interactive feature for you guys, and we're going to have some additional video and audio features for you tonight as well. So we're excited. Let's get right into it. Let me introduce my regular panel of hosts. We have a full panel tonight. As always, we have Scott Lincicome of the Cato Institute, Neal of the Federalist, Jeff Blehar of the Ace of Spades Decision Desk, and F. Bill McMorris of the Washington Free Beacon. Producing for us, as always, is Aaron Gardner. Glad to have all of you. And our guest for this week is Laura Fillault, who is a candidate and blogger. She's a candidate, local candidate down in Texas. We're going to ask her a little bit about her campaign as the show goes on.
Fio. It's pronounced Fio.
Hey, we established last week that I pronounce people's names how I want to on this show. So let's move right into the news of the day. Of course, the biggest news story, I think, on the merits, maybe it's not getting the most coverage, but the biggest news story on the merits is the ongoing refugee crisis in Europe. It's difficult to pin down an exact number of refugees that have crossed the border from Iraq and Syria. They're going through Turkey. They're going through various places down through Hungary and Austria up into Europe. Many of their main goals seems to be up into Germany. But best estimates I have seen indicate that somewhere around 12 million people have fled Iraq and Syria and the rampage that ISIS has been going on for some months and are attempting to find homes, at least temporary homes in Europe. To put that into perspective for you, that is about the size of the entire illegal immigrant population in the United States that has come over here for decades and decades and decades, but they're all crossing into Europe at once. As you might imagine, this is creating a number of logistical crises. It is exposing people to human traffickers and all of their ravagers, human rights abuses, sex slavery, a number of different tragedies that have been going on. And this has been an ongoing tragedy for a number of weeks. The media has been reluctant or hesitant to cover it at all. The first I saw any network cover it was MSNBC last week finally covered when the horrendous event, 71 refugees who were being trafficked through Austria were found dead in the back of a truck. A human trafficker, his truck ran out of gas and he just left them there and fled on, and they all suffocated to death in the back of the truck. But the thing that really finally got people's attention was really happened about 24 hours ago when there was a boat that left a small Turkish town that's across the street from Greece and was capsized and drowned. All 12 people in it drowned. And there was a picture that they showed on the news today, which was one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen on cable news. Very moving picture of a small boy, I guess he was 2 or 3 years old, who had drowned there, and you had a Turkish official there who was basically picking him up and carrying him back to his family. And that has finally, that image, that one image, has finally gotten the press somewhat to pay attention today to what is a massive humanitarian crisis. Ongoing just horror. People, the most of these refugees now are ending up in camps in Hungary where there are now just unspeakable conditions, absolutely unlivable. And our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to the people who are fleeing the region and the ravages of ISIS. So the first question is going to go to you, Laura, and I hate to start us off on such a down note. We typically try to start with a little more upbeat stuff. But Laura, the question for you is, how much is U.S. policy to blame for what we're seeing that's going on in Europe right now? How much of this is laid at the doorstep of what our government has done in that region?
Well, so in my quick research, I found out that in 2002, Bush included Syria as one of the axis of evil. So we've not liked Syria for a while. And then and Assad was president. And in 2008, France was the one that kind of extended their hand and said, hey, maybe y'all aren't so bad. And about that same time, the IAEA found traces of nuclear material in Syria, and on and on and on. In 2011, they had an uprising, and then we have the chemical weapon attack in 2013. We've known for a long time, last 13 years at least, that Syria is up to no good, and we haven't done much of anything to help Syria. I don't know how we can do this. I get that a lot of Americans are anti-interventionist now, and look what there's got what this where we are at the moment with that. So I don't know how much help we give them. I do know that it's not a surprise to anyone in the area that ISIS has um, gone into Syria. Assad wasn't exactly the strongest leader there. He had a lot of backing from the a lot of some of his um, Muslim. I don't remember what they're called. The leaders of the of like their priests. What are they called?
Imams, you mean?
Clerics. And so it's gone downhill from there. Now, did we know that it would head that way? I have no idea. Is it a surprise? No. So, do I think it's America's fault? No, but I do think that when we stopped paying attention, when we walked away from Iraq, uh, we set ourselves up for what we're facing now.
So, Bill, let's go to you next. What do you think about that, Bill? I mean, obviously, we can talk all day about, sins of omission. What could we have done that we didn't do? But what about, the active measures that were taken, in particular by the Obama administration, and kind of tinkering with the ongoing civil war in Syria? Do you think that has made the situation better or worse? Has it prolonged it, or has it made it better than it otherwise would be?
Well, I think that the danger we find ourselves in right now is the idea that we could dabble, play on the sides, take a non-leadership role, and somehow guide and direct a civil war in the direction that we like. And I think that was mistake number one. Our military advisors have been, and our generals and the Pentagon have been telling Barack Obama that ISIS cannot be contained by airstrikes alone. But Obama has an ideological guided position that we can never, ever, ever put boots on the ground that will actually make a difference. So, yes, we have sent over some technology, we've sent over some equipment, but we've done nothing to prevent the militias that we've donated to from getting overrun and having their equipment stolen from them. So we're in a catch-22. And unless we take a more active role, we're going to keep seeing human atrocities like this. It started with Assad using chemical weapons on his own population, and now ISIS has captured some of these. There's evidence that ISIS has captured some of these chemical weapons and are using them as well. So it's a bad situation. It's been a bad situation for about 5 years now, and it's going to get nothing but worse in the weeks to come because we have not taken a strong position, and we've tried to have our cake and eat it too here.
So, Scott, let me go to you next. Let's talk a little bit about our refugee policy and our asylum policy. In the wake of a lot of this news, a lot of politicians have taken the posture of, oh my gosh, we need to start speeding up the process for asylum applications and so on and so forth. And I saw Rand Paul on TV today, and he basically kind of took the contrarian view, as he often does, and says, look, what you have to remember is that in a lot of these conflicts past, like in Somalia and so forth, when we kind of granted asylum, we're kind of rubber stamped with the asylum, a lot of these people turned out to basically start terror cells here in the United States, and things didn't work out so well for us. And he's saying, look, these people don't have to necessarily become our problem. What do you think the right approach is here? I mean, do you favor more of a broad asylum approach in terms of the folks that are coming to Europe and who are looking for some place to stay? Clearly Hungary and Austria are not the answer. Or are you stand mostly with Rand Paul, and say, look, we got to be careful, and really we have to let this play out on the European continent as it is right now?
No, I mean, I certainly would be more sympathetic than Rand Paul. That said, I mean, you have obvious national security issues to deal with, but this is a colossal tragedy, and one that Bill mentioned that we certainly have contributed to. I don't think I wouldn't go so far as to say we're to blame for, but we certainly have contributed to it. or at least by having an absolutely inconsistent, incoherent non-policy. And that said, if the United States does want to continue some sort of leadership role in the world, I think granting and taking refugees is part of that. It's part of being, this kind of beacon of hope. Now, that said, I certainly wouldn't want to actively intervene in European policy, but that doesn't mean the United States cannot unilaterally permit asylum seekers that have a way of getting here from getting here.
So Neal, I guess the next obvious question, and I think that we know the answer at least as long as Barack Obama stays in the White House, but the next obvious question is we watch these kind of horrible images going on, as we watch what's going on with ISIS, as I mentioned, they're kind of rampaging unchecked across the Middle East. I mean, are we as an American people ever going to be at the point where we put boots on the ground in the Middle East again? I mean, have we kind of reached the point where we are going to say whatever else it is that we do in terms of granting people asylum, in terms of providing monetary aid, we're never going in with our military again, or at least until another generation has passed? Or do you think that these kind of images, as they continue to kind of pour out and hit the airwaves, are going to kind of soften that sentiment a little bit in the weeks and months and years to come?
I think we had damn well better put boots on the ground sometime soon. Before the decision is made for us, we already know that ISIS has inspired attacks on U.S. soil against U.S. citizens. They haven't been terribly successful, but I think they've gotten the point across that ISIS can reach out and touch us if they want to. So we really do need to go back in. We need to put boots on the ground, and we need to kill as many of them as we possibly can. What we have watched unfold for the last year is a human rights abuse on a scale that we really actually can't measure accurately at this moment. We have examples from the 20th century, Cambodia, and the Soviet Union, of course, but the brutality that we see from ISIS and the immediacy of it because of their proficiency with social media, it's evil, and we're looking right at it. And what are we doing about it? We're not doing a damn thing. We're lobbing bombs at these guys. That doesn't work. We've got this dithering president who, is more than willing to go into Libya without any kind of congressional action or anything like that. But when we're looking at ISIS actively exterminating entire populations of people, bulldozing and dynamiting the very history, the shared history of most of the world, we do nothing. And that's a moral poverty. That's something that that we're going to have to answer for in the history books, I think. And yeah, so I think we definitely need to go back in. And I think that the more images we see, and I think that the more dead Syrian toddlers that we see washing up on shore, I think the harder it'll be to deny that we need to go in.
Can I just say that it feels like my heart is, I'm worried, it feels like my heart is hardened here, because as moved as I am by these images, and as upset as I am by these images, and who wouldn't be, obviously, I just feel like there's a lot of, it's very easy to say, oh, well, we need to go back in. Oh, yeah, we need to do more. What? What more? What is your plan? What is your exit strategy? What is your plan to defeat ISIS? Do you have any idea what it would take? What kind of manpower requirements it would, what kind of manpower commitments it would require? I can tell you right now, I guarantee you that Barack Obama and his administration, they sure as shit don't. All right, not only do they not have any idea what it would actually take in terms of boots on the ground to defeat these people, they certainly don't have the will to fight, even if they knew. Okay, so we need to understand that a half-assed intervention is actually, despite the humanitarian crisis that we are witnessing right now, worse than no intervention at all. I am very reluctant, and I hate to sound like Rand Paul. I can't even believe that. Once upon a time, I was the biggest neocon in the world, but right now I feel like I'm channeling the spirit of Ron and Rand Paul when I say no. I don't really, as painful and as agonizing as this is, as much of a manifest tragedy as this is, the human misery that we see on an everyday basis. We are fighting World War II. We are not engaged in a total war. We do not have the will to get all the way in until we are done and complete the job. And I don't even know if any of us here, or anybody in the Pentagon for that matter, really understands what that kind of full-scale effort would look like on a successful end. So I am very reluctant to say that we should go back in.
Well, I agree that a half-assed intervention is worse than no intervention at all. I think a half-assed intervention is what caused this crisis in the first place. But I don't know that I agree that you necessarily have to have all the answers before agreeing that something should be done. But that having been said, let's talk a little bit about the logistical challenges that we're facing in terms of the migration here. And one of the things that always comes up in the context of the immigration debate here is, gosh, we've got all these 12 million people here, and, we don't have a way to send them back. But then again, it's a challenge to assimilate them into the country that we have and pay for their services and so on and so forth. So as we think about 12 million people kind of marching across Southeast and Northeastern Europe and trying to land in places there, I mean, it threatens, if it's a longer-term thing, to change the demographics of Europe as a continent and present challenges that they're, quite frankly, not prepared to face. And I guess my question for you, Jeff, is do you think that this is going to be a longer-term problem, or can we reasonably expect that this situation will sort it out to the degree that the vast majority of these people will go back in a reasonable time and be temporary refugees as opposed to a permanent displacement of these people from Iraq and Syria?
Well, I think it's going to be a longer-term problem for the simple reason that I don't see ISIS going down anytime soon. I think that the distinction that you just drew there is an important one. These aren't I hate to talk about it and use Mexican immigration as a parallel, but frankly, the matter is that the people who immigrate up north from Mexico come here because they want to live here permanently. They want to work here, they want to live here, they want to send money back to their families back down south, but they would like to stay here basically as long as they can. And even if they oftentimes come here intending it to be a temporary stay, hey, America rocks. People want to stay here. A lot of these refugees are leaving the only home they have ever known. They have a much more blood and soil attachment to it than any of us could conceivably understand in our American culture. They would love to be back where they are. They don't want to go. And if there was any conceivable chance that they could return and live a peaceful life, they would do it. The only problem, of course, is that they're not going to be able to, at least not for the foreseeable future. So I do think it's a long-term crisis for the simple reason that, ISIS isn't going away anytime soon. And the thing is I look at the way that these European countries are treating the refugees, and it seems barbaric. There was a story I just saw this morning where there was, in Hungary, which is kind of turning into a proto-fascist state, I might point out. They loaded the refugees onto train cars. It's very creepy. It has all sorts of creepy World War II resonances. They loaded them onto train cars and said, "Oh, we're sending you to Germany." And so they all got in like, "Yay, we're free. We're gonna have And then so they sent them to concentration camps, which is totally fucked up in every conceivable way. On the other hand, I don't know how you ask countries with much smaller populations and smaller budgets and smaller economies than we have here in the United States to absorb refugee populations on the scale of, 100, 200,000 people are coming? All told are going to be fleeing from Syria and those various regions by the time all is said and done. I almost ironically think that we could take them here in America. Hey, we're big, and I'll bet you they would be a really great industrious community. Let's send them to wherever we want them, and I'll bet you they would become really great Americans if they stayed here long term. But I don't know if I feel particularly bad when I see countries like England refusing to say, okay, yeah, just send us as many Syrians as you can find. There's always a question of whether there are bad apples within them. Whether these people sometimes have more terrorists who are sneaking in. Who knows? I feel it's very easy to judge and say, oh, you should accept these people. I kind of understand the reasons to stay here, however.
And I think one of the things that's missing from this discussion, and maybe it's impolite to point this out, is that when we talk about Muslim populations, here in America, we are talking about, 3, 4, 5% of the population tops, whereas in many countries in Europe, they're already facing a Muslim minority that is 20, 25% in some areas. And quite frankly, the cause of quite a lot of civil unrest. I mean, if you look at some of the countries that are the least tolerant of Islamism in the world, it's places like France where they have mass rioting from the Muslims in the street is a weekly occasion.
And the other thing is that the first generation refugees, they're not going to become terrorists, but their children, who knows what happens to their children as they're captured by the local culture surrounding them. Those people could easily turn into a national security problem for these countries that accept them. That's the danger of long-term immigration, and it's ugly, and you don't like talking about it. It feels cruel and sort of detached to discuss it, but it's real.
Well, we saw that criticism come down against Poland last week when Poland volunteered to take thousands and thousands and thousands of refugees, provided they were Syria's persecuted Christian minority. So
the Christians,
they came under intense fire, and they said, listen, we don't want any terrorists coming in. We have national security concerns. We're happy to alleviate the problem of refugees. We're happy to take some off your hands, but we're prioritizing taking Christians because this is a persecuted minority, and they will better fit into our social fabric. And they got lit up by social justice warriors who act as if it is our obligation and everyone's obligation to import hundreds of thousands and millions of people who have left their homes because their own dictator, who they so gleefully supported, couldn't protect them from radical terrorists that came from their own population in many cases. So my big criticism, I think you should be able to take whoever you want and whoever you can take. But why aren't we seeing, and yes, Turkey has taken more than anybody, but you have these very wealthy countries, much more wealthy than Poland and Hungary, like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, that are not stepping up, and they should be taking responsibility for this. And for some reason they're not, and maybe it's because the Syrian population is the wrong type of Muslim for a Sunni country. And so we always hear about the Christians and how, oh, Christian Europe is so biased against Muslims. Well, certain Muslim countries aren't taking them because they're the wrong type of Muslim. And I think these guys should be leading point. They want to be regional actors. They want to be dominant regional players. Well, guess what? Deal with your humanitarian crisis.
Well, and I think that countries like the UAE and Yemen and so on and so forth have come to realize that what the Syrian crisis has shown them is how precarious their grip on power might really be, and inviting tens of thousands of unknown quantities in their country is just not a risk they're willing to take, regardless of who they are. But Neal made an important point in the chat, and I want Neal to say this out loud about these refugees and the potential risks of turning them away en masse. Neal, what was the point that you were making in the chat?
Well, I think that I was riffing off of something Jeff said about how second-generation immigrants might be radicalized. I think that you have to consider that these same people, if they're not slaughtered in the meantime, will remember who turned them away years from now. They'll remember who turned their parents away or their grandparents away or their great-grandparents away in their hour of need. They'll also remember who let them in, who helped them. And I think that you can't discount what an action like that might mean for charting the course of that interaction between this immigrant population and the wider population.
The problem, though, is that I think that's a very generous look at how they would view a country. When we lived in France, we lived in a western suburb called Poissy, and it was what I call a blue-collar area, and it had what we call Section 8 housing, and a lot of it was refugees from Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco. So they were Muslim religion. I don't know if it was a Muslim in culture and or in practice. But what I saw a lot of times, the way France deals with refugees is they bring a family in, and then they're under investigation. They have to check out all their story. In the meantime, dads can't work. Nobody can work. So dads just end up, and you saw them all the time. They're the ones that just sit there with their, playing chess, or they just lounge around. They have nothing to do. And I don't care where you come from, men want to provide for their families. So you've got disgruntled dads, you've got annoyed moms, and this happens everywhere. And then you get this kids who are growing up in this new country. The parents aren't happy, and they don't understand why, and they don't really care, but all they know is where they live now, they hate. And I saw the disrespect that I saw from the kids, and when I say kids, I mean 15, 16 up to 23-year-olds. When I would sit and wait in the subway, the first 20 or so people that would make it through this, and we were the end of the stop, first 20 or so kids that came through that jump at the stalls, they were all these same kinds of people. They had no respect for the country that they lived in, and because the country that they lived in didn't respect their parents, and they have no interest in integrating. And also in France, and I think in other European countries, unlike the United States, you're not French. Even if you live there, even if you become a French citizen, I could have become a citizen and nobody would have ever thought I was French. I would have just been a French citizen who was American. And so integration doesn't happen as easily in that country. And so accepting them in, and like Leon said earlier, they have already taken on a lot more Muslims, because they tended to try to colonize the Muslim countries in the South or in Africa. So you've got already a growing number. You get in a socialist country, they can't afford to continue adding on people to their welfare programs, because they're already strapped as it is. This is where I think the U.S. can do a better job at handling this. The U.S. also does a better job of integration, because we're about ideals, as opposed to, like, my husband became American, right? And everybody will see him as American, even though he is French. And so we have a better chance at it. But there are consequences to letting refugees in, and this happened even before ISIS.
If I can just break in really quickly here, I don't know what sort of reasons the people in France had to emigrate, but I doubt they were facing crucifixion, being buried alive, burned alive, sold into sex slavery, having their children buried alive, burned alive, sold into sex slavery routinely by ISIS. I think there's a degree of difference here in just the amount of violence ISIS is doing and the severity of this problem. I also agree with you that America could do a much better job of settling these refugees. And we don't have to talk about permanent settlement. We always jump to either or conclusions. What about temporary settlement for refugees? Perhaps on a, I don't know, reservation in Alaska, where there is tons of space, mind you, just absolutely oodles and oodles of space, until such time as we do put boots on the ground in the Middle East, restore peace, destroy ISIS, and then they can go home in safety. That's a third option. There are degrees of difference between the polar opposites, and even between that option.
All right, guys, let's move on. I'm going to talk about some other topics besides the refugee crisis, as important as it is. Let's move on and talk about the other big story of the day, that being Kim Davis, the county clerk in Kentucky. For those of you who are not following this story, she is a county clerk who has decided, I guess, ordered all of her staff not to issue any marriage licenses at all, rather than comply with the Supreme Court decision, which says that same-sex marriage must be recognized and marriage licenses must be issued. She was today essentially arrested and taken into custody on a contempt order by a federal judge. And so I'm going to go once again to Laura as our guest. What are your thoughts and your take on this situation with this woman, Kim Davis, here in Kentucky?
Okay, so I've had to learn a lot, like, in a short amount of time, because I don't understand any of this. From an elected official perspective, I get that she swore an oath before SCOTUS came down with their decision. So this must have been upsetting for her, because this is not what she signed up for, in theory. And yet it's now law. And when she took that oath, if it was anything like what I did just as a candidate, It's to defend and support the law of her state, which is Kentucky, and the Constitution in so many words, and then a lot of other things that you're not supposed to do. So that's her job. Now she's faced with that awkward decision or challenging decision, frankly, because she either has to conscientiously object and quit, which means losing her job, or do her job because she's a public servant and she's meant to serve the public, and it means all the public, and it means serving the public with all the laws instead of picking and choosing. This isn't a private corporation. This is the government. And when you work for the government, you work for everybody in the government and you do all the laws. Now, we could go off and talk about, well, Obama doesn't, and that's true. And yet, she isn't either. We're not talking about Obama right now. We're talking about her. So in the long run, she had a choice to make. She could have either let her clerks sign the certificates for her, and she chose not to do that, and that meant contempt of court, and she went to jail. I don't know what point she's trying to make. I've heard the First Amendment argument over, religious freedom, but I'm struggling to really agree that she's still free. She is literally free to practice her religion. She does not have the right to demand to keep her job just because she doesn't like a particular law. And that probably makes me unpopular, but that's what I think about it.
So, Bill, let's go to you next. You're probably the most socially conservative guy on the panel, I would say. And to me, there's a difference. I mean, I would strongly support the right of a baker or whoever it is to refuse service to anyone on almost any grounds that they want. But isn't there a distinction to be made here? I mean, this is a public official with a job, an actual government function to perform here. I mean, does the religious freedom argument wash with you in spite of the position that she holds as a government official as opposed to a private person?
No. We talked about this. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've read somewhere from some guy who's relatively important historically that you can't serve God and mammon. And we're a country that cuts up babies and sells their parts for money. Yeah, we're probably mammon. So, yeah, withdraw. Sorry, quit your job and protest. You have no right to... Everyone in America thinks they have a right to work wherever the hell they want. And I criticize the gay population, the gay activists who try to infiltrate Christian student groups and then get them kicked off campus for not appointing an atheist to be their executive director. And for this woman, sorry, you were hired to give out marriage licenses. And yes, you have principles, and I even agree with the principle that you're citing, but sorry, I criticize sanctuary cities, I criticize pot laws that run contrary to federal policy, and sorry, unless someone goes in and makes an exemption, this is the law, you have to actually abide by it. So yeah, all I'll say is I don't think she should have been hauled into court and thrown behind bars. I think that was crazy, and as Sean Davis at the Federalist pointed out, nobody threw Gavin Newsom in prison, and none on the left were calling for Gavin Newsom to go to prison for violating state law and issuing marriage licenses to gay couples. So in the interest of not being like a social justice warrior, I'm going to remain consistent and say, guys, if you have a huge problem with this, resign.
Look, can I just jump in for a second and say we both you and Laura have been saying, oh, this woman was hired, this is a job. This is an elected official. This woman ran for office. She asked the voters to elect her, and then she suddenly decided that she could not execute the functions of her elected position. You have no right to be an elected official. We're not talking about a lifetime government employee. We're not talking about a GS.
So what about impeachment?
But okay, you know what? Impeachment, if it comes to that, I believe that there is a mechanism for that in the Kentucky State Constitution, but it's rarely been employed. She should resign, all right? And if she doesn't resign, yeah, I totally think that throwing her in jail for contempt is the right answer. And of course, it's giving her what she wants too. She clearly wants to be some kind of martyr, and huzzah! Mike Huckabee and Ted Cruz have just stood up for her and beshat themselves by talking about how, oh, we're throwing Christians in jail now, which is not at all the point here. As I've said,
hey, criticizing Ted Cruz is Neal's job, and I won't have you taking it on
Well, I just want to make this last point, then I'll let Scott talk. I said it several times on Twitter. It is not civil disobedience when you are actually a part of the state yourself, okay? Civil disobedience is something that comes in opposition to the state.
What about the guy from Valkyrie? What about the guy from Valkyrie who tried to blow up Hitler? Is that civil disobedience, Neal?
Hey, you know what? That's funny you should say that, because David French of National Review wrote an article that I really strongly disagreed with the other day, saying something similar to that. The saying, oh, Obergefell, it's like the Dred Scott decision. You need to, it's a revolution. And I thought that was insulting. I'm saying, listen, if you really think that Obergefell, the gay rights marriage decision, is the same thing as Dred Scott, well, you know what the aftermath of Dred Scott was? It was secession. It was civil war. It was 1/4 of the entire United States population being killed or maimed. That is what happens after something of that scale. Is that really the kind of level of reaction that you think is justified by Obergefell? If it is, fine. But if it isn't, don't use that kind of silly analogy. It's like the American political equivalent of, Godwin's law or argumentum ad Hitlerum. Don't go there, all right? Because this is stupid Supreme Court decision that I wildly disagree with, both as a legal matter and as a cultural matter. But it is not Dred Scott. It is not Hitler. Let's not even invoke those when we talk about it. And that's all I have to say.
So, Scott, it's your appointed position on this show to field the impossible questions and to avoid answering them. So the impossible question here is, look, regardless of whether you agree with the woman's decision or not, and I don't personally, I think a lot of people are bothered by literally throwing her in jail over this. But, I mean, what's the answer here? I mean, she's an elected official. She can't be fired. She can't be, essentially made to resign. What is the alternative if there is one? Or should we just say, look, it's right. She deserved to be thrown in jail?
Well, I probably wouldn't start with jail like they did. I would probably start with simply barring her from the premises. Start with something like that, especially since it's so clear that is precisely what she wants, is to be thrown in jail, to be martyred. That would seem, if you are a judge or you are trying to maintain some sort of stability, the last thing you want to do is to further incite things by throwing her into jail. Now, obviously, that's fraught with its own difficulties because she is violating the law, and that's kind of what the law says you do. But at the same time, I would say, there needs to be a little bit of pragmatism here. Start with anything other than throwing her into jail. And like I said, why not just simply bar her from the premises and continue to operate without her there? But as usual, no good answers for the Scott question.
I think, listen, I think, and you can jump in after Neal answers his question, which I think is kind of a softball with your own take on this, but I actually think this is wonderful news. I think this is wonderful news. I couldn't be happier that this is happening because we've set a precedent here, okay? We have a decision on the record. Court clerk refuses to perform their legal duties. We immediately go and throw them in jail. Gun owners or people who wish they could be gun owners in D.C., but can't get them because D.C. clerks refuse to issue the permits that they're lawfully ordered and lawfully supposed to be giving. Neal, is this the right answer? Do we send people down to the District of Columbia courthouse to file lawsuit after lawsuit to try to get these people thrown in jail? Is this a shooting war we want to get in?
No, we will lose. We lost already. Gay marriage is the law of the land. There's no way we can really fight it at this point, except by slowly changing the culture, hopefully getting in some better.
I'm not talking about gay marriage. If we're throwing court clerks in jail for not doing stuff that we agree with, I mean, why don't we get a few of ours in the process? Would that send a message to the other side about playing this kind of game?
No, it wouldn't. They would characterize it as the negative impact it would have on the republic. But yeah, I really don't see much of a way forward on this one. I think this woman, I agreed that she should have resigned. If you have a conflict with your conscience and doing your job, obviously your conscience has to win out. Yeah, I just don't understand what this woman hopes to accomplish by doing this.
And by the way, let me just clarify. First of all, I don't have a huge problem with her grandstanding like this and wanting to or refusing to do this. I mean, if she refuses to do her job, I think she should either, like you said, she can resign or just face the legal consequences. I mean, that is the issue. But at the same time, I do share Neal's pessimism that this sets any sort of precedent for those of us who actually think that it could be serving pro-liberty devices in the future. The reality is that there is an enormous double standard. That double standard has been around for a decade or more, that when the refusal to follow the law by a public official is done in the name of progress, it is cheered, and when it is done in the name of non-progress, then it is not cheered. It is reviled. And regardless of how you feel about gay marriage, it's clear that most in the punditocracy and those that are judging on TV and in print have put this into the bad category, and thus it is treated badly. Next, when we see the other side, that type of quote-unquote civil disobedience will be cheered once again. That's where we are, unfortunately, and I don't see much hope for this establishing any sort of great precedent.
All right, let's move on. It is another week in 2015, and so therefore it is another time for us to have a mandatory discussion about the ongoing Hillary email server scandal. And we keep having to come back to this because we keep having this tremendous and incredible slow drip of information that just goes on and on and on. I'm astounded that, 9 months into this scandal, we are still having new and damning revelations literally every single week. The newest of these, Laura, as we come back around to these, and this is what I call the point of every scandal where shit gets real, is when people start taking the Fifth Amendment. That's when you know stuff is about to happen. And we have had the first person in the Hillary scandal has now invoked the Fifth Amendment, one of Hillary's old IT staffers. What do you think the significance of this is, that we now have the person who was responsible for setting up the email server taking the Fifth, saying he's not going to answer questions from the FBI or from Congress? Will this add in any significant way to the damage that's already been done to Hillary by this scandal?
Honestly, I don't think so. When I heard this news, my first thought was, this is just some like Geek Squad guy that went in. I mean, he may have known who he was setting up the servers for, but he may not have known why. And so I don't know that him taking the Fifth is it more about Hillary, or is it him trying to protect himself, because this was not what he was trying to get involved in. He was just doing a job. So what's more astounding to me is that it just keeps coming. All these emails keep coming. We are flooded with scandal to the point that it's too much for anybody to handle. I think this thing's just gonna. Unless the Obama Justice Department does something about this, I really think this will all just go away. But no, I don't think him taking the Fifth, because I don't see him, whoever the server setup guy, it's not like he was I'm assuming he was not a government employee, and if he was low level. I don't see him, I see this as him trying to protect himself.
Sure, sure. I mean, obviously he's trying to protect himself, but I mean, to me, the message is this is literally the guy responsible for setting up the email system, refusing to answer questions on the grounds that it might criminally incriminate him. Um, Listen, I mean, what was it? Ernie Fletcher
Well,
in
it will
Kentucky was
criminally
taken down
incriminate
by.
him, right?
Right. Well, at least potentially, yes. I mean, that's the question.
Well,
And I mean,
he set up an email system that's illegal, right? She's not supposed to have this.
right. Although she maintains, of course, that it was legal under some fairly spurious grounds, and in fact, her campaign was trying to pressure the guy not to take the fifth, which is one of the things we'll get into. But still, you know, I've been following politics long enough to remember Ernie Fletcher in Kentucky was taken down solely on the grounds of taking the fifth before the grand jury, and faced a 20-point loss his next time around in the general. Of course, the difference between Ernie Fletcher and Hillary Clinton is that Ernie Fletcher is a Republican and Hillary Clinton is a Democrat, and you can't kill a Clinton with scandals, at least as far as we know. But we're about to find out now, I think, whether that holds to be good and true. So we're going to go. Bill is apparently walking in circles on us here. Bill, are you able to answer questions?
Always.
Right, so,
hit me.
So, Bill, one of the things that's come out, one of the other major revelations that's come out this week, and I suppose this is another one of those things that we should have known was coming, but still is news that it actually has come out, is that now not only is there classified United States information, but there's also sensitive information from foreign governments that was included on the email that was sent to Hillary's private server and has now been turned over and made public as a result of this entire process. What, if any, effect do you think that will have on our relations with some of the other countries that we do business with, these revelations that are coming out as a result of the Hillary email scandal?
Well, I mean, we've already offended them because we're tapping their phones. If you look at Angela Merkel, which I totally support. And then you have Hillary Clinton not just saying, this was one of the most revelatory emails, is the fact that she was informed that it was classified ahead of time. And she said, send it over anyway. And then when she got it, she actually sent back and replied and said, oh my, that does deserve to be classified. I'm paraphrasing, of course. So, yeah, who's going to talk to Hillary Clinton candidly when they know that she's going to turn around and tell Sidney Blumenthal about it? I mean, when you think about this, Hillary Clinton is that friend who you whispered to in middle school and said, I really like Valerie. And she immediately turned around to Valerie and said, Bill really likes you, and screwed up your chances of ever holding hands with Valerie. So, yeah, she's the queen bee. She's the snitch. She plays against people, and she thinks she's above the rules. So, really, that's who Hillary Clinton is, and it hasn't seemed to hurt her too much among Democratic primary voters. But is it going to win her any friends in the intelligence community? Probably not. Is it going to win her any friends that she brags so much about having in her name-dropping filled memoir, Hard Choices, in foreign governments? Probably not. Is it going to hurt her in the general public? The more we see classified emails sent out there, the more it's going to hurt. And right now, this is just something that's localized to the press. The damage isn't that bad thus far, but it's also the summer. Nobody's been paying attention. And I think the more you chip away at this, the more we're going to eventually see other people say, Hillary's vulnerable, I'm entering the race. And that's what the Joe Biden candidacy that we're all begging for is all about.
So, Scott, let's go back to you. As we saw in really starting about 2005 and continuing through about 2008, is that the intelligence community, when angered, can be a very powerful political opponent. I mean, they can cause tremendous amounts of damage to a sitting president, to a candidate, through these, basically they call it the New York Times. I mean, look, they know everything, and they can make everything they want look bad. I mean, what do you think about what Bill said here? Do we face a realistic possibility that some of these folks in this community are going to be so upset by Hillary's lackadaisical attitude toward national security that they're going to start to wage the kind of war via leak that they did on the Bush administration in the latter part of his presidency.
Yeah, so first, full disclosure, I was trying to listen to what Bill was saying, but I was totally distracted by his right eyebrow. The sucker was really starting to go there. So I think I got it, but your recap did well. So totally agree with the eyebrow, Bill, that that the intelligence community, to the extent that Hillary tries to throw them under the bus, they have very, very long knives, and they will use them. I have no doubt about that. It is not a Republican or Democrat thing. This is a self-preservation thing, and the U.S. intelligence community will preserve itself, and they will do very creative things to ensure that they survive. And I think that to the extent that Team Clinton, their final play is blaming everything on the intelligence community, they are going to be sorely greeted with New York Times headlines touting various emails, reports, and so forth, incriminating the Clintons. And let me just one more thing. I really think the most offensive and incriminating thing I heard today, actually, had to do with the fact that Hillary had or still has an AOL account. Let's leave the rest of this aside. Using an AOL account in 2015 or any time really after the late 1990s, early 2000s, in my opinion, is itself an impeachable offense, regardless of the material you're sending.
This is totally true. AOL accounts haven't been a thing since Steven Strasberg was a good pitcher.
That's very true.
All right, so let's go to Neal. One of the maybe not damaging to Hillary revelations in this week's email dump, but I thought hilarious revelations in this week's email dump concerned your best buddy John Boehner. The note, I believe it was from Sidney Blumenthal, which said that everyone in the Republican caucus hates him because he's an alcoholic and he's lazy and he has no principles. All three of those things true, but that having been said, could potentially ruffle some feathers. What are the possibilities, do you think, that we're going to see some of that kind of candid talk from Hillary or her aides about other Democrats? As you're aware, the Democratic nominating process is much more keyed in on the superdelegates. These are the people that Hillary needs to be on her side. You think that this might hurt her with some of them, some revelations that her and her aides have had frank and unflattering discussions?
Well, don't you think they went through and redacted all those and just left the cracks about Republicans in? There's all sorts of things that are just blacked out in those emails. So, it could be classified information. It could be something about how many facelifts Nancy Pelosi has had. We really don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some unflattering remarks about her fellow Democrats. But I wouldn't count on getting anything as juicy as the revelation that John Boehner likes booze. Who didn't know that? As Matt Boyle revealed in a Breitbart exclusive a few weeks ago, I have to submit all my Federalist cocktail articles to the speaker for his personal approval. This is a known thing. I don't see this moving the needle anywhere.
All right, Jeff, let's go to you. We have kind of an interesting thing that could be cropping up here. We're reaching the point with this particular scandal and the things that have been revealed. Any day, it's going to be revealed that some foreign government, whether it's the Chinese or someone else, had access to the server. I know it for a fact. We're going to get to the point where the Obama administration is going to have to make a decision about whether they throw Hillary under the bus or continue to basically support her actions as Secretary of State. Which way do you think that's going to tip? And do you think that it depends entirely upon whether Biden runs, or do you think that it'll be an independent consideration that they'll make?
They're not going to throw Hillary under the bus. End of story.
Not even if Biden runs?
Not even if Biden runs. Moving on. Next guy.
You got nothing else to say about that? You don't think
it's just that simple. Anything else would be superfluous commentary. They're not going to throw it by. They're not going to throw her under the bus. It's not going to happen.
All right.
It's a death sentence to the Democrats if they do.
All right. Well, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about 2016. It's that time of the year where this always kind of lurks in the background as the biggest story. And Jeff, since your answer was so brief about the last question, we'll stay with you with regards to the next question. And it's going to be a very simple question. Can the Jeb Bush campaign get back up off the mat? I mean, is it really built as exclusively a front-running campaign, or is it something that can get back up off the mat, given the amount of money he has?
I hate to make my answer even shorter than the last one, but no. No, Jeb's campaign can't get up off the mat. It's done. That simple. Someone else will be the nominee. It's not going to be Jeb. It may be Marco, maybe Scott, maybe Carson or Trump, God help us, but it won't be Jeb.
All right, so let's move on back to Laura. Why is it that you think that the media continues to play this as a race essentially between Jeb Bush and Trump? I've been watching CNN a lot the last few days. Their debate promos feature exclusively Trump and Jeb Bush. Why is Ben Carson, who has by all accounts moved into a consensus second place in all the polls, getting absolutely no media attention right now?
Well, the cynic in me says that's not what the narrative would allow. You can't have a neurosurgeon doctor that's black be running for president and feature him because, GOP is the party of old white men. So that he would crush every bit of that idea. Whether or not he's the right candidate is a different story, but absolutely that they can't feature that. They would have to really kind of have too many interior conversations with themselves about what they were portraying about the grand old party as it is today. And I don't think that the media has actually moved along with what I call let's call them new Republicans, or that's probably offensive to somebody. But anyway, the conservative movement, however you want to, non-rhino people, non-GOP-E, which I hate, by the way. I think it's a stupid thing. They're not keeping up with that. They have to be the heroes of the story. And so if they're the heroes in the story, then they can't have people that look heroic, like Ben Carson, like Marco Rubio, like Ted Cruz, like Carly Fiorina, be heroes. So it doesn't work for them. Why do they keep featuring Trump and Jeb Bush? Because they fit the old white men mold. That's exactly what they want the GOP to look like, despite the fact that the Democrats actually do look like that. Old, white men and women.
Bill, let's go to you. There was a Monmouth University poll came out, I believe it was yesterday, showed Scott Walker has fallen all the way to 3% nationally. Is his campaign done, or is this something that he can get back up off the mat? I mean, is he now in danger really of being relegated to the second tier of candidates, where he's actually started the year more or less as the front runner?
The only people I hate more than establishment Republicans and grassroots Republicans are primary voters. And from what we have seen of them and their tastes...
Bill, you just named everybody. You just named everybody in the Republican Party. You realize that, right?
I was so charmed by Laura's prior answer because she doesn't understand that insulting our audience is what we do here. That's like the main goal of this program, is to insult everyone who watches it. Please continue, Bill.
I love how you shouted, Jeff. Oh, if I shout, people won't realize I'm explaining the joke. You are to comedy what Hillary Clinton is to every aspect of human existence, which is an abomination. And you should step down. Anyway, is Scott Walker...
he should be dragged off to jail with Kim Davis. Step down.
Exactly, for failing the public trust. They came here to laugh tonight, and instead they had to see Jeff. So, anyway... is Scott Walker mortally wounded? I don't know. I still think it is way too early in this process to write anybody off that is not named Jeb Bush. He's cratered too much. He's going to have people fleeing from him
And really, Sonny Bunch said something very poignant today. And it has changed my entire mindset. I used to get very upset that people like Bobby Jindal and Rick Perry were left off the debate stage. But then Sonny Bunch over at the Free Beacon said, embrace oblivion. And now I'm embracing oblivion. And now I'm having fun again. Now I'm backing Donald Trump. Because we might as well have fun while we're doing this, right, everybody? If we're not having fun, what's the entire point? So embrace oblivion. Let's all just get behind the Trump train, and we'll just have a ton of fun.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, why don't we all just enjoy giant curly fries, Jamocha shake, and a cherry turnover? I feel what you're saying, Bill.
Yeah.
But Scott, do you have a rejoinder from someone who hasn't given up on life?
No, I'm sorry. You were mistaken. I have given up on life. The last few weeks have convinced me, as I've been saying on Twitter a good bit, that nothing matters. It is really time for us to embrace decline. I wouldn't say oblivion. I would say decline. And that decline is simply the understanding that our fellow Americans simply have no interest in policy or really anything other than electing a reality TV buffoon to lead what was once the greatest country on the planet. So in that regard, no, I really don't have much happiness to spread. More seriously, on the candidate side, I don't think anybody in the top tier is really worth writing off just yet. I do have to say, though, very seriously, that the Trump campaign has proven once and for all that at this stage, people should stop putting out policy papers because it is simply a waste of energy.
Neal, sadly, we come to you as the last attempt to be the light at the end of the tunnel here. Is there any hope for anyone not named Donald Trump to win the nomination? I mean, at this point, it's been 2 weeks of him making his lead larger and larger and larger. What, if anything, will be what finally tips him off the top of the mountain?
Maybe he'll get bored, or maybe Hugh Hewitt will ask him a question that he thinks is too hard or something like that. I don't know. I mean, he could just stay in for the entirety of this nominating process, and then continue running as third party. It really doesn't matter. He doesn't have to go back to work or anything like that. He can just, he's 69 years old and he's got $3 to $9 billion depending on who you ask. So this is his fun time. These are his golden years. I mean, for God's sake, the guy's going to stay in as long as he can. He's going to do as much as he can, and he doesn't care what any of us think. He doesn't care what the Republican Party thinks. He doesn't care what America thinks. He does not care. And apparently neither do the primary voters. The primary voters are giving him all the attention that he could possibly want because, I don't know, a bunch of the slack-jawed morons who, just want to clap and dance at the spectacle. They're unworthy of a republic. They don't deserve it. They can't keep it. They should all just be disenfranchised at some point. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I think we should do it. They can't vote anymore. They shouldn't have to. They shouldn't be able to.
So it sounds like the panel is unanimous that this race is a three-way contest between the sweet meteor of death, the food at Arby's, and Gustavo Fring for 2016. So
no, I'm supporting Ted Cruz now.
Oh wow, man! Now we know it's really gotten bad.
Yeah, and I just want to dig up Franco and appoint him. I'm going full
Generalissimo. So let's close off the show on a positive note. And for that, of course, we have to go back to Laura. None of these guys fit the bill. Obviously, the top of the ticket is an absolute disaster this year. We're all drinking ourselves to death watching Donald Trump just run farther and farther away from the rest of the field. No matter what he does, one of the things I admire most are people who actually go out there and run in races that can make an actual difference. That's at their local city council, their local township, and their local school board. Laura, in just a couple minutes here, tell us a little bit about your candidacy, give your website, and tell people what you're doing down there in your hometown.
Okay, so the Woodlands is a township. We are a special purpose district within Texas. We don't actually exist. We are an unincorporated area that the state of Texas has bestowed an ability to tax our residents, and that's just about it. We are, in some respects, a glorified homeowners association. And we have, instead of a city council, a board of directors. And I am running for position 7, which is against my opponent is an incumbent from forever. His dad was one of the people that helped create the Woodlands, along with George Mitchell of fracking, not George Mitchell, the politician. And he needs to move on. He's been here long enough. What we need to do, what we should have done back in 2014 is incorporate, which we had an opportunity to do. And instead, we are now paying kind of hush money, or kind of when you pay people not to come, the protection money. We're paying protection money to Houston so they don't annex us, and it runs at about $1.5 million a year. And we gave them initially $16 million just to get started, and I think that that's ridiculous. And so what I'm running my campaign on is us becoming masters of our own destiny. Right now, our counties even own our roads. We own just about nothing, and are run by a development company who owns all the land, because we're not a government. We don't own the land. So that's what I'm trying to do. My favorite part about this is that, like you said, local politics is what matters most to me, and it matters most to everybody that's listening, because you pay most of your but most of your taxes go to your local area. They have the most influence on how your life is. For example, here, the development company that owned a private park drained the lake, and now they're building commercial buildings. And the federal government had nothing to do with that. So we rail a lot against the federal government, but I think that that's a coward's way out, and it's an easy thing to do. And instead, you should start looking at finding a candidate that you like in your city, in your county, a school board, like Leon mentioned, something. Get involved, give them some money, give them some of your time, start learning what a campaign looks like, so that when you start to see what happens at a state level and a federal level, you have a little bit better understanding. And so my website is Laura Fillault for Township. It's just that. So kind of how my Twitter handle is spelled. And it's basically Laura Fillault for Township.com. So I'd love for you to come visit me. And if you're so inclined, hand over $10 or so.
All right. Thank you very much, Laura. Appreciate your time. We're out of time for tonight, so we're going to close it off. Let me thank our panelists: Scott Lincicome of the Cato Institute, Neal of the Federalist, Jeff Blehar of the Ace of Spades Decision Desk, and F. Bill McMorris of the Washington Free Beacon. Thank you guys so much for being here, taking time out of your week. Aaron, thanks so much for your work producing. I'm reading the reviews on Twitter so far. It's been very positive. Video for her time as our guest tonight. See there, I pronounced the name right when you've earned it and not a second before. All right, guys, thanks very much. Hope to see you back next week.